Welcome to the Australian Property Investment Podcast. We tackle the big questions in property investing. Our guests are industry experts, and we're fortunate to pick their brains on the challenges that investors often encounter when growing their property portfolio. Welcome to the Australian Property Investment Podcast. Let's start investing. G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Christie David, and this episode is going to take on a different flavour, a different spin, because we're hitting the 100. So I grew up playing a lot of cricket and unfortunately never hit 100. And so to me, this is going to be my high score, and hitting the triple figures deserves a bit of a chance for us to stop, pause, and reflect on the journey. And that's the nature of this episode. So what we're going to do is just review what got us to this point. What have been some of the highlights in launching this podcast, as well as some of the feedback that we've got from our clients, and have a bit of fun with it this episode as well. So I want to say thank you very much. If you've tuned in, if you've joined us on the journey, I want to say thank you very much. And this is genuinely where I want to start with this episode, which is a thank you. A thank you to our listeners who have reached out, given us the feedback, maybe dropped us a question as well. And that's what's kept us going, because the feedback and I guess the gratitude that we've got from people that have been listening, that have got some tidbits, that have got some pointers, for example, and it feeds into my next point, which is the information they've got from our guests have been critical. So I want to say a huge thank you to all our guests who have been part of this journey. When I look back at the names that we've had on here, it just blows me away that so many people have given up their time, their energy, and most of all being willing to share the information that sits inside their heads as well. And that's the beauty of this podcast medium, which is getting access to someone that you can listen to on your own terms, in your own time. That's why I think this medium is just so popular. And you see that from the number of podcasts that are out there as well. A special thank you to also social storytellers. So for any of our guests that have been lucky enough to come up to our studio in North Sydney, where we get it for the day and we kind of have guests coming in and out. The team up there at Social Storytellers done amazing jobs. When you see the audio, when you see the video, clearly if you're on video, you know that I'm not in the studio because it's so nicely done up there as well. But that has been a big part of making sure that the production quality is top notch as well, because you can't get away with bad audio when it comes to a podcast too. A big thank you to Rachel Talata and our team. Now, Rachel is someone that sits behind the scenes as well, but very much going about organising our guests, getting everyone organised, getting the studio organised, and most importantly, getting me organised as well. So I want to say a huge thanks to Rach in our team. So this is a little bit of what goes on behind the scenes to bring you each and every episode as well, in terms of the production, in terms of the guests, in terms of getting it out there, and then making sure that these episodes go live as well. So I certainly don't take for granted the amount of effort that goes into each and every episode as well, and I hope that it really resonates with you too. Having a look at our journey, a couple of questions I do get from time to time is, what's our listenership like, or how many downloads? What do we track or trend? And my response is, it's probably one of the few things in our business that we don't measure, and kind of goes against the grain usually of how I like to operate, which is what gets measured gets managed. But in this, for this particular activity, all I know is that we've had clients or new clients reach out to us going, I've been listening to your podcast and I really appreciate it, and I'd like the opportunity to work together. To me, the fact that we've had a couple of people reach out, more than a couple, but had people reach out to us off the back of that, that's enough for me. It means that I know it's working. And again, I'll go back to this medium, which is some people that have reached out maybe have been Googling, or maybe they've had a bad experience, maybe with another broker, or maybe with a bank, for example, or maybe they just feel too shy. They're a little bit more introverted. They feel too shy to reach out and drop an internet inquiry, or maybe they feel judged for what's happened in the past or where they are presently, and they haven't taken action. And then having a listen to our podcast episode, they've now had a way to take some action and go to that next step as well. And that's where I go, well, it doesn't matter how many listens or how many downloads. They're great vanity metrics. What we really want to track is the impact that we're having on people's lives. And when I hear that people reach out to us off the back of it, I know that we are hitting a home run here as well. So when I look at that, and in conjunction with the guests that we've brought on, I feel really fortunate. This is something that I get to do as part of my day-to-day rhythm as well. So being able to sit down and meet some amazing industry experts, some thought leaders. I usually refer to them as best in breed because they are. They're people that really set a standard inside their own industry as well. I know that I want to have played a certain level, so therefore the people around me, I want them to be at that certain level to make sure that when we're putting out content, it's just not content for content's sake. It actually has some purpose and some meaning around it as well. But most importantly, it's for the Australians who are listening that want to build wealth through property and ultimately build intergenerational wealth through a high quality property portfolio. If we come back to that every single time, what are we doing and why are we doing it? That is what we're doing. Rach asked me a question and said, look, what's some of the insights or lessons that you've learned having nearly done 100 episodes? And it strikes me, there's a couple of home truths that I hear from a lot of people, and I see it with clients as well. Property or money in the bank isn't necessarily true wealth. Health is true wealth, and that goes for mental health, spiritual health, physical health, emotional health as well. Now, last couple of years probably has brought that to a major head, where health and well-being doesn't matter how much money you have. If you get sick, what have you got? So we grew up with our mum saying health is wealth, and that rings true to me as well, which is why I try to focus so much on health and well-being before money. And more money in the bank doesn't necessarily always equal more happiness. Yes, you get more choices in life, but what I've also seen is more properties doesn't equal more happiness. And that's where we come back to that quality versus quantity discussion that we have with a lot of clients as well. Another thing that I think, upon reflection, having looked at that, is how much has changed, especially if I look at the time that we've been running these 100 episodes, but also how much, the last 7 to 8 years that I've been running Atelier Wealth, how much has changed. I look at life, our lives are completely different to what they were a couple of years ago, let alone what they were when we launched this a few years before that as well. The lending market is completely different. There are things at the start when I started out as broking, living expenses weren't an issue, credit cards weren't an issue, rental shading wasn't an issue, for example, HECS, private school fees, private health insurance. None of that seemed to matter when it came to serviceability, which is also an ultimate borrowing capacity, which is ultimately how much people can borrow and buy for. So all that kind of cascades along. And I just thought we were doing investor loans at 99% LVRs, 97% interest only at some point. You couldn't dream of that. And I just think things have gotten harder more than they've gotten easier when it comes to lending. Now, I don't like to say that because I think there's always a way. So where there's a will, there's a way when it comes to buying and investing. However, bank policies will continue to tighten, and we will never get back to a 97% loan to value ratio for an investor, interest only. They just won't do it. And so I just think where we are now, it's probably the easiest it will be. And we hear this in the business sphere. This is the best time to be an entrepreneur or a business leader, for example, business owner. This is the best time to be an investor, because things will get harder. Prices will go up, for example, with more competition. So where I look at what we're doing with this podcast, it's getting people into their headspace. And that feeds into my next point, which is around the mindset of the investor. And if you look back to some of the episodes, particularly around, I'd say, Munzural Khan, Victor Kumar was very, very big on it as well. For example, the number of guests that have come on and said the self-development work that they have done has paid bigger dividends than investing in property. Now, naturally, the investing in property gives you this on-paper wealth. It can give you the in-the-bank wealth as well if you decide to cash in at some point. But that consistently blows me away about how many times I hear from people that I've interviewed that have done some form of self-development. I don't really mind who it is. I think we had one recently. They went through Grant Cardone, who can be a polarizing figure, but it doesn't take away from the fact that what that person's doing is choosing someone that they resonate with to get some value out of, to invest in themselves to give a better rate of return on their income producing asset, which is themselves and not their property portfolio. And having done some personal self-development work, and that's through our business coaching, through our individual coaching, for example, through fitness coaching, investing in yourself is the greatest investment you will make. Become an income producing asset, which is I am my greatest income producing asset, as opposed to properties. I control the outcome for me as opposed to properties as well. So I think if you're looking at how to invest in property, my question is, how are you investing in yourself as well? One of the questions Rach asked me here is behind the scenes and funny stories. And there's this, I just, as soon as she said this, I'm like, yeah, I definitely know what this is when it comes to the podcast. Our first episode, and they always say you should be embarrassed at your first, whether it's your first video, your first car, your first podcast episode, and make true to form, we were super embarrassed. I unwillingly, this was years ago, even before Sienna, our daughter, was born, hired a little studio in Chippendale. They said, yep, you can jump in there. I had brought my laptop. I had no software, so I had no programs to download the audio onto. I had no knowledge about what to do. I went in there, this little box where you can plug in stuff. There's no cords. And it's thanks to Neil Ashworth, one of our earliest guests, I was lucky to be there. He's like, mate, what we need to do is go and get a few USB cords and plugged in. We downloaded the software and away we went. And I realized at that point, do it yourself versus going into a studio, and I pay for the privilege of going to a studio. There's just so much peace of mind that comes when you pay versus do it yourself. And again, we can draw an analogy out of that going, you can go and look for a property yourself. You can go do it yourself. There's going to be quite a lot of learnings, quite a lot of brain damage. The amount of time that I spent trying to do that versus I go into a studio, they've got all the cords, they've got all the gear, they've got the best gear, for example, that I possibly couldn't afford. Why wouldn't I just pay extra and take a shortcut to success? I'm not taking a shortcut for the simplicity. I'm taking a shortcut to get to a successful outcome. And that's, again, something that I looked at going, just learn so much from it. I want to do, and this is probably why some people probably don't do some, whether it's they want to do a podcast or they want to buy a property or whatever it is. Why don't they do it? It's because when you're trying to do it yourself, you've got to go through every single step in the process. Versus if I can delegate, I can not abdicate. If I can delegate this to someone who's a professional that does this day in, day out, it's a much shorter way to get to success. So that's one thing that another one we probably had was we lined guests up at a certain time, called a guest. I'm like, where are you? About 20 minutes late. And they said, I didn't realize that was today, and jumped into their car and zoomed on over to North Sydney, and they were there pretty quickly as well. So to that guest, I want to say thank you very much, and I haven't forgotten that as well. Some of the stories that have really stuck out to me upon reflection as well, there are some amazing, amazing guests. I'm talking about some killer real estate agents. I'm talking about some wonderful buyers agents, interior designers, for example, outdoor garden design experts as well. So everyone has played their role. There are a few names or people, conversations that I had that I think really, really resonated with myself and our listeners as well. So Simon Pressley is a fantastic market commentator, buyer's agent as well. That extends across the guys at Right Property Group as well, who have been around for a very, very long time, but I think have a, what's the word? I think they're a good nature in their outlook personally and professionally. They've been through enough property cycles, the two of them, and I think that's one thing that I look at their proof of concept is they've been through plenty of market cycles and still generate great results as well. Someone like Julie Crockett sits in that category. Michael Yardney, Chris Gray as well, so really synonymous names in this space too. Munzural Khan, an absolute legend in the accounting space for property investors. Any clients that refer to him, we just say, look, he's busy. Like, he's one person with that many hours in the day, but geez, mate, he's an absolute machine sometimes as well. And what he's done personally sets a standard. Now, he obviously plays not his cards close to his chest. He just doesn't want to brag about his portfolio, which I think is kind of very humbling and endearing. But also what he does is he gives you that confidence to go, why aren't you doing? So every client that we've got that deals with, say, like a Munzural or a property savvy accountant, for example, comes back with more confidence and reassurance that what they're doing is the right next step as well. So we talk about industry veterans. I think for us, we've been really fortunate that they've just said yes. But we've asked them, they're like, yeah, we'll come on and share our knowledge. There's a lot to be said about that as well. Someone newer on the scene, Steve Palise, for example, Paul Glossop, making waves as that next generation of buyer's agent. I think they're doing fantastic work in and around, say, socials and raising the profile, through a book, through socials, and running great businesses as well. So I think they do well from a personal perspective, portfolio, but also from a professional perspective as well, which I think is very admirable. Some real highlights for me personally, someone's being like the Craig James and Martin North. Now, these are people that are highly sought after from a media perspective. Again, ask them, we'd be happy to jump on, and first thing is they say yes. So it's not necessarily only generous with their time, but generous with their knowledge as well. So I think for us, I'm very fortunate that our humble little podcast has got some amazing big guests on there as well that have just shared selflessly about the knowledge that they've got. Looking forward to the future and where we want to go, one thing that I'm really keen on is to get more of our clients to come on. Now, that's not an easy one because, look, I go back to some of the guests. They're media trained, or they've maybe got an agenda, which is their own business, for example, which is cool. We all have, I guess we all got maybe to plug ourselves for a little bit. But clients come on and they think, the first thing I say is, I ask when they come on, they're like, I don't think my portfolio is big enough. I'm like, that's not the point. It's not the quantity. It's about your journey. So some people have gone through some major setbacks, whether that's financially, whether that's from a health perspective, whether the property they bought didn't deliver what they thought it would be from a cash flow perspective. I mean, one of the best things I've had from a client is I had a few properties like, this is not passive income. This is very, very active. I'm like, I'm glad you've realized that. Because this fallacy around having a passive income, there's no such thing. Business, property, whatever it's going to be, there's no just revenue stream that comes in without any maintenance or management. It's quite hands-on. And I'm glad he realized that pretty early on because it changed the way that he attacked it and looked at his portfolio as well. So I think that's one thing that we're trying to really encourage is more clients to come on. The next one that I think the next wave that we're kind of scratching the surface on is property technology. So look at, say, Coposit, for example, before you bid, some of these platforms and tools that are here to serve home buyers and also investors. I think the technology is going to play some part, but also it's human interaction and looking someone in the eyes and say, look, how does this work and what is this the right decision for my portfolio? So something that I call high tech and high touch is something that we're going to touch on in the future as well. So I think the big part for me is the next 6 months is probably wealth being is what I call it. So financial well-being. And given that, we've had 12 rate rises, maybe a couple more to come, cash flows, doing it hard, people that are kind of, I'd say, going to a different financial stage of their life, which is, some people haven't had to do with rising interest rates. This is going to be a true litmus test for resilience, for grit, for tenacity. So to a lot of our clients, and if you're listening and you're going through that as well, understand that you're not alone. It's what I call scaled pain. So scaled pain is everyone borrowed to the scalability that the banks would lend them. So it doesn't matter if you're on 80, 90, 100K, 200, 400K, you generally borrowed to that limit that the banks will bet you. So scaled pain is something that I think affects everyone at the moment. You can't be bulletproof from 12 rate rises and still more to come. There's definitely some pain, and that's exactly what the RBA intended when they've hiked up rates like that as well. And just to wrap up, so I do from time to time get people reaching out going, how did you launch a podcast, or how did you to get to this stage? You put one foot in front of the other, and that's, like I said, that first time at Chippendale. Had an idea in my head and I just thought, how do I do it? And it's taking action is the big step, then work out the details. I think quite often, even when it comes to buying property, it's like, take some action. Now, it doesn't mean go and buy a dud property just to take some action. It's like, well, speak to a buyer's agent, find out your borrowing capacity, look at the market, see what properties are selling for example. The detail is then, some people get attached to the detail, which is spreadsheets upon spreadsheets, and I'm worried about this one, and I'm like, this one's selling for this, and the rental yields, and trying to do my forecasting on modeling. It's like, well, that's not helping you make a decision. That's analysis paralysis. And the same thing goes for, say, launching a podcast. It's your mindset. Can I do it? Yeah, absolutely, you can. You need simple, like a microphone and a video, away you go. You don't need the studio in North Sydney, for example. Make mistakes. Geez, mate, some of the audio that we had very early on was shocking and terrible. That doesn't matter. As long as you get it out there, you can, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be actionable as well. And the last one is just like buying a property. I say buying a property is a combination of attitude and ability. So the attitude is, yes, I want to do this, and the ability is, well, financially, do you have the ability to make it work? The same thing would go for something like a podcast. It's the attitude and the ability combined will generate and yield you results as well. So I want to say thank you very much for all the feedback that we've got. I want to say thank you very much to all our guests as a wrap up as well. For the time that you give me and my voice, I really want to say thank you very much. Our goal is very simply to help more property investors buy with confidence, build a high quality property portfolio, and build intergenerational wealth. And if that's what we stand for and that resonates with you, I would love if you reached out to us, gave us a review, or even just said, hey, here's a couple of questions I've got for you, so you can make these episodes even better as well. Hey, that's a wrap for another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Christie David, signing off on episode 100. Thanks very much.